Hello and welcome to Crop Roadshow. In this series, we'll discuss the history of 3 or more crop cultivars, starting with the history of the crop itself. Then I'll rank them for agronomic traits, which will be out of 3, disease resistance traits, which will be ranked out of 2, 1 for each major disease, and 2 points for historical breeding use and future breeding use. Let's begin. Now on to our first pear cultivar we'll cover for this episode, and we'll start with the history. Asian pears in general are said to have originated in the 1st century, in terms of cultivars, with the first varieties being documented in the 8th century. The Asian pear Shinko cultivar, however, is a relatively recent addition. These were bred in Japan using the research stations Niigata and Okayama. The cultivar was developed in 1941 from a cross between 2 cultivars of Asian pear, the AMYLOVORA pear and the Hortic pear. Definitely mispronounced these, but my Japanese is not that good. Sorry, I'm not a weeb. Most of these pears are grown in the Haruna district in Takasaki City, one of the largest growing fruit regions within Japan. Shinkos include amongst these many fruit that are grown in that region. The extensive pear history as well, with a pear festival marking said history. The cultivar proper, in flavor, is sweet, floral with mixtures of citrus and butterscotch undertones, and the color is similar to a russet. Now on to the traits. Shinko, in terms of disease resistance, seems to be quite good, with one paper by Dr. LECOMTE indicating that this cultivar of Asian pear is the most resistant cultivar of pear to fire blight that exists within the Asian pear species, at least with modern cultivars, ranking consistently in a multitude of different tests involving both artificial inoculation of both flowers and stems. So for disease resistance, I give it a solid 2 out of 2. In terms of historical breeding, I could not find breeding information on what new cultivars were bred from this variant, so I cannot attest to any breeding that's happened historically or currently. As such, we will not be counting breeding as a category for this episode, only agronomic value and disease resistance. As such, it'll be out of 5 for each individual cultivar, rather than being out of 7. In terms of agronomic traits, it bears regularly, produces a high yield, and tastes quite good from what I've read. As such, it's unable to find agronomic faults within this cultivar, so I give it a 3 out of 3 for agronomic traits, for a total of 5 out of 5. Which brings us to a brand new section. Any cultivar that gets 100% gets a gold star. The day after this video is released, I'll write down the name of a gold star cultivar that got 100%. If any homesteaders are growing anything, this will be a highly recommended fruit cultivar if you live in an area that can grow it. But enough hemming and hawing, on to the next cultivar. The next cultivar is called ERWINIA. The fruit is a dark russet in coloration, and was an interspecific cross between 2 pear species, a wild pear from Russia called Pars oresis, and a common pear cultivar of unknown origin. It was a chance seedling discovered in the Morden Research Station in Manitoba in 1978. Unlike the wild species itself, it is very sweet and pleasant to eat, and surprisingly show no insect damage. Now on to the traits. ERWINIA, like its wild ancestor, has high levels of resistance to fire blight. This pear, also known as the Manchurian pear, is naturally fire blight resistant. Please see my video on pear domestication for further information. But the Manchurian pear is one of the natural species being studied for their resistance to fire blight. This species is naturally resistant to many different insects and diseases, including fire blight, and its hybrid seems to have retained much of that resistance. So from a disease resistance ranking, I give it a solid 2 out of 2. In terms of agronomic ratings, the tree itself is very durable, owing to a high level of disease resistance. The tree itself is hard down to zone 3, making it very cold tolerant, but it does have some drawbacks. Although the fruit are quite flavorful and tasty, they do not store well, lasting only a few weeks. This is also compounded by the fact that it can only be pollinated by a wild pear of Manchurian pear origin, hence the 2 out of 3 for agronomic traits. As such, I have to give it a 2 out of 3 for agronomic traits, for a total of 4 out of 5 for the Uri pear. Now on to the next cultivar. Our last cultivar is the autumn bergamot pear. We will first cover the history of the bergamot pears, then following that the fall bergamot pear. The bergamot pear class was bred in Italy by various Italian pear breeders. They were bred for specific traits such as high yield and no pretense, i.e. high flavor. So high flavor and high yield was the main goal of these Italian breeders. This class gained popularity quickly after being bred, and they spread throughout Europe, and new varieties were bred from these populations. The origins of the autumn bergamot variety are kind of contested. There are two different types described, the English autumn bergamot and the French one. It was asserted by Mr. Hedrick, the foremost pear expert at that time period of the 1800s, that the English autumn bergamot was bred independently of the French pear of the same name. Others still contest that they're both the same cultivar. Based on current information, the bergamot class was likely bred during the days of Julius Caesar in what is now known as Italy, and the autumn bergamot may have been also referred to as the Syrian pear of Virgil and was introduced to England during that time period. Now on to the traits. The bergamot pear has a unique flavor that's found only in this class of pears. Indeed, it's old folklore that says the bergamot pear is actually a medicinal plant that can treat various diseases such as diseases of the pancreas and liver. I tried to find information concerning its resistance to fire blight and I got nothing. But based on by the Australian government, it appears that the lemon bergamot is susceptible to fire blight, indicating that the bergamot population is susceptible to fire blight. At the very least, and of course the bergamot population seems to be susceptible to scab with the exception of some new Russian cultivars developed relatively recently. As such, for disease resistance, I have to give it a 0 out of 2. In terms of agronomic traits, it's a short storer, so you can't store it for long periods of time, no more than a month, with the autumn bergamot variety specifically only lasting 7 days. As such, for agronomic features, I give this a 2 out of 3, for a total of 2 out of 5 at the ranking. It is a very flawed, but nonetheless tasty pear from what I've gathered. And that covers everything for this episode. Thank you for watching.